He was the king of cool, a man whose easy charm and velvet voice made him one of the biggest stars of the 20th century. He ruled Hollywood and Las Vegas with a drink in one hand and a joke on his lips, looking like success came to him without any effort at all. She was a stunning Orange Bowl queen, the elegant woman who stood by his side and became the matriarch of their sprawling Hollywood family. Together, Dean and Jean Martin were the toast of Tinseltown, a glamorous couple who seemed to be living a perfect, fairy tale life, but under all the Hollywood glitz, the laughter, and the applause, they were living a story of unimaginable heartbreak. It's a story of a loss so profound and soul-crushing that no spotlight could ever erase it. It's a story that doesn't end with a big finale, but with a quiet, devastating ritual, an ex-wife sitting in a restaurant, night after night, just to watch the man she could no longer save eat his dinner completely alone. What could possibly shatter a romance like that so completely? It all came down to a single, fateful day in 1987. A day that would prove that no amount of fame, fortune, or adoration could protect a family from the kind of tragedy that changes everything, forever. Before all the sorrow, there was the sparkle. Dean Martin, who was born Dino Paul Crocetti in Steubenville, Ohio, was the classic American success story. He was the son of an Italian immigrant barber and spoke only Italian until he was 5, something he later said made him feel like an outsider. Maybe that's what fueled his Dean Martin persona, a guy so comfortable in his own skin that he made everyone around him feel at ease. He tried a little bit of everything, from boxing to working in a steel mill, before his smooth baritone voice found a home in the smoky nightclubs of New York. His career was on a slow burn until he met a wild, flailing comedian named Jerry Lewis. In 1946, Martin and Lewis became an overnight sensation. Dean was the handsome, cool-as-a-cucumber straight man to Jerry's manic, childlike energy. They were total opposites, but together, they were pure magic. They took over nightclubs, radio, and movies, becoming one of the most successful comedy duos in history. Their deal with Paramount producer Hal Wallace was the stuff of legend, earning them millions and giving them unheard-of control over their careers, but while his professional life was exploding, his personal life was quietly falling apart. His first marriage to Betty McDonald gave him 4 children, but it crumbled under the pressure of his new fame. It was a tough time, a classic Hollywood story of a rising star leaving his past behind. By 1949, the marriage was over, and Dean was granted full custody of the children. The public, though, only saw the star's smooth rise, not the private chaos, and then, he saw her. It was New Year's Eve, 1948. At a huge party in Beverly Hills, Dean Martin's eyes landed on a 21-year-old model and former Orange Bowl queen named Dorothy Jean Beeger. Everyone called her Jean, and she was breathtaking. Dean told her she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He later admitted to her that she was the living version of a dream he'd had since he was a poor kid in Ohio, the pretty, blue-eyed blonde girl who lived in a magnificent house on the hill. For Dean, Jean was everything he'd ever wanted: beauty, class, and a kind of grace that seemed to calm the restless parts of him. Their romance was a whirlwind. Just a few weeks after his divorce from Betty was finalized, Dean and Jean got married on September 1, 1949. His best friend and partner, Jerry Lewis, was his best man. It was a glamorous start to what would be his longest and most important marriage. For the next 24 years, Dean and Jean Martin were one of Hollywood's most admired couples. Jean was so much more than just a beautiful woman on his arm. She became his anchor. She took in his 4 children from his first marriage and raised them as her own, and together they had 3 more kids: Dean Paul in 1951, Richie in 1953, and Gina in 1956. Their huge Beverly Hills mansion was always buzzing with activity, but Jean somehow created a normal life in the middle of her husband's insane career. His daughter Deanna remembered that even though his public image was that of a hard-partying rat packer, her dad was home for dinner every single night. He was a loving father who, behind the scenes, put his family first. Jean was the one who kept him grounded, managing their big family so that Dean could be the king of cool for the rest of the world. Their life really was the stuff of Hollywood dreams. They were at every big event, and their friends were a who's who of entertainment: Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Judy Garland. The Martin house was the place to be, not just for the adults, but for the kids, too. Deanna Martin said all the neighborhood kids wanted to hang out at their house because her dad was so much fun. He was the kind of guy who could charm the Queen of England one night and chat with a busboy the next, treating everyone with the same easygoing respect. He had The Dean Martin Show, a huge ratings hit that ran for 9 seasons and won him a Golden Globe. His music career was legendary, with hits like That's Amore, Memories Are Made of This, and of course, his signature song, Everybody Loves Somebody. He was a real movie star, holding his own with John Wayne in Rio Bravo and leading the iconic cast of Ocean's 11. From the outside, it looked like a perfect life. A perfect career. A perfect marriage. A perfect family. Dean and Jean Martin had everything anyone could ever dream of. They had built their own Camelot right in the heart of Hollywood. It seemed like nothing could ever shake them, a true love story for the ages. But even the most beautiful lives can have deep cracks hiding underneath, and even the strongest foundations can break under the weight of an unbearable tragedy. Their happiness, it turned out, had an expiration date. The first cracks in the fairy tale started to appear in the late 1960s. The pressure of being famous is relentless, and Dean's career took up everything. His professional split from Jerry Lewis back in 1956 had been a massive public event, almost as shocking as the presidential election. But his solo career took off even higher, making him a bigger star than ever. And with that fame came more temptation. The whole boozer act he did on his TV show, which friends said was mostly an act, the glass on stage was usually filled with apple juice, started to blur the lines between the performance and his real life. The gossip columns were constantly buzzing with rumors about affairs. The strain on his marriage to Jean became enormous. She once described him as a deeply sensitive man who, away from the cameras, was quiet and preferred to solve his problems on his own. But the stress of his career and the constant public eye created a gap between them that even their love couldn't fix. In 1969, they separated, and their divorce was finalized in 1973, ending 24 years of marriage. Fans were shocked. The Martins had always seemed so stable. Their split felt like the end of an era. Dean married a third time, a short-lived marriage to a salon receptionist named Catherine Hahn, but it was clear that Jean was the great love of his life. She never remarried. And even though they were divorced, a powerful, unspoken connection was still there. It was a bond built over decades of history and raising a family together. It was a bond that would soon be tested, and tragically cemented, by the most devastating event of their lives. Of all their children, Dean Paul Martin was the golden boy. Nicknamed Dino Jr., he was handsome, talented, and charismatic, just like his dad. He was good at everything he did. He was a promising tennis player, a musician in the pop group Dino, Desi and Billy with Desi Arnaz Jr., and an actor who even got a Golden Globe nomination. His friend Morgan Mason told People magazine, "The problem with Dean is that he was too good at too many things." In 1981, he found his true passion, flying. He joined the California Air National Guard and became a captain. His father was incredibly proud. "I'd be proud even if he didn't become a jet pilot," Dean once said, "because he's a good boy." March 21, 1987. It was a day that started out ordinary but would end in total darkness. Captain Dean Paul Martin, 35 years old, took off from March Air Force Base in an F-4C Phantom jet fighter. He was on a routine training mission, flying with 2 other jets through the San Bernardino Mountains. The weather that day was awful. A blizzard was raging, creating a blinding wall of snow and wind. In the terrible visibility, his jet vanished from the radar. For days, the family waited in agony. Search parties combed the snow-covered mountains. Frank Sinatra, Dean's closest friend, even chartered a private helicopter to help look. But with every hour that passed, hope faded. Nearly a week later, they found the wreckage. Dean Paul's jet had slammed into the side of Mount San Gorgonio, flying at about 400 miles per hour. He and his weapons systems officer, Captain Ramon Ortiz, had died instantly. The news didn't just break Dean Martin's heart, it shattered his entire being. This wasn't a character in a movie or a line in a sad song. This was his son, his Dino, gone forever. The vibrant, life-loving King of Cool disappeared that day, and a ghost took his place. His friends could only watch, helpless, as the light just went out of his eyes. Singer Paul Anka later said that his son's death was a huge turning point. After that event in his life, things really changed. His close friend, impressionist Rich Little, put it even more bluntly: once he lost his son, that was the end of him. That was a big part of him that died and never recovered. The grief just consumed him. He pulled away from everyone and everything that once made him happy. His famous friendship with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. grew strained. In 1988, they launched a Together Again tour, partly to try and pull Dean out of his depression. But his heart just wasn't in it. He only lasted a few shows before he quit, which made Sinatra furious. The two old friends, who had been like brothers, didn't speak for years, though they did eventually reconcile. But the easy friendship was gone, lost in the fog of Dean's overwhelming sadness that he lost all his passion for performing. The man who could once own a stage with a simple smile now found it unbearable. His daughter Deanna remembered the change. He wanted it to be quiet. It was so sad, devastating for all of us. It was tough for him. The drinking, which had long been part of his public image, became a very real, private comfort. His old partner, Jerry Lewis, said that after Dean Paul's death, Dean let himself go. The performance stopped being an act. The pain took over. He basically became a recluse. The man who lived in the spotlight now only wanted shadows. He hid away in his Beverly Hills home, not wanting to see anyone. Author William Keck, who got to know Martin in his final years, described the change perfectly. Dean Martin's final years were very, very sad after he lost his son. It was like looking at a candle without a flame. And through all of it, there was Jean. The divorce papers and the years they'd spent apart meant nothing when faced with a loss this catastrophic. Their shared grief over their son brought them back into each other's lives, not as husband and wife, but as two people tied together by a tragic, unbreakable bond. She was there by his side, a constant, quiet presence as he sank into despair. She, who was dealing with her own unimaginable pain, became the silent guardian of his sorrow. They were no longer the glamorous Hollywood power couple, but just two parents, united in the worst way possible. Trying to survive a loss that, for Dean, was ultimately unsurvivable. The fairy tale was shattered, replaced by a long, slow, heartbreaking goodbye. The last years of Dean Martin's life were a portrait of quiet, heartbreaking loneliness. The charm and energy that had defined him for 50 years were gone, buried with his son on that snowy mountain. He had essentially retired from public life, only coming out for his new, sad routine. The story goes that every evening, he would go to the same Italian restaurant in Beverly Hills, La Famiglia. He would sit at the same table, always by himself. The staff would bring him his usual meal, often pasta with clam sauce. He would eat in near silence, a solitary figure just lost in his own world. Author William Keck saw this ritual himself, describing him as a wax figure that was barely moving around. He was physically there, but the man everyone knew was long gone, but he was never completely alone. At another table, sitting just far enough away to give him space but close enough to keep an eye on him, was Jean. His ex-wife, the woman he had loved and lost, reportedly came to the same restaurant every night. She wouldn't sit with him, she respected the wall of grief he had built around himself. Instead, she just sat and watched, a silent protector making sure the man she'd shared her life with didn't have to face his lonely dinners all by himself. It was a final, powerful act of love, a sign of a connection that divorce couldn't break and tragedy couldn't erase. She was watching over the man she could no longer save. The family that had once been Dean's greatest source of pride became a source of more sorrow. Losing Dean Paul was the wound that never healed, but it wasn't the only one. In 2001, his daughter from his first marriage, Claudia Martin, died of breast cancer when she was only 56. The family was hit with another tragedy years later, adding to the feeling that this was a dynasty marked by loss. In September 1993, Dean, who had been a heavy smoker his whole life, was diagnosed with lung cancer. Doctors told him he needed surgery to prolong his life. But Dean, just tired and heartbroken, refused. He'd had enough. It seemed like he was ready to let go, to find a peace in the next life that he couldn't find in this one. His daughter Deanna remembered that his own mother had died on Christmas morning, and they had a family joke that he went to visit her. Jean was there for him through this time, a comforting presence as he faced the end. It said she encouraged him to think of his parents and their son, Dean Paul, waiting for him. He disappeared from public view completely in early 1995. He spent his final months at home in his Beverly Hills mansion, watching old westerns, just a shadow of the man he used to be. On Christmas Day, 1995, almost 9 years after his son's death, Dean Martin died of acute respiratory failure. He was 78. The fact that he passed away on a day all about family and joy felt like a final, tragic piece of irony. The King of Cool was gone. In his honor, the bright lights of the Las Vegas Strip were dimmed for 1 minute, a tribute saved only for the true legends. He was laid to rest in Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery, his crypt marked with the simple, perfect words from his most famous song, "Everybody Loves Somebody Sometime." But the story doesn't quite end there. The weight of the family's tragedies continued. In August of 2016, another heartbreak struck. Richie Martin, Dean and Jean's youngest son, a musician who had spent his life celebrating his father's music, was found dead at his home in Utah. He was only 62. It was another shocking loss for the family, and then, just 3 weeks after Richie's death, the matriarch of the Martin family was gone too. Jean Martin passed away on August 24, 2016, at the age of 89, after her own battle with cancer. She had outlived her famous ex-husband and 2 of their 3 children. She had carried the burden of all these losses with a quiet grace, her own pain often overshadowed by the public's focus on Dean. Her death was the true end of an era, closing a painful, sorrowful chapter for the Martin family. The story of Dean and Jean Martin is a powerful reminder that behind the brightest Hollywood smiles, you can find the deepest human pain. It's a story of a love that was strong enough to build an empire, but was shattered by a loss that no parent should ever have to face. For all the fame, the laughter, and the music he gave the world, Dean Martin's final chapter was a quiet one, defined by a grief that hollowed him out from the inside. In the end, it wasn't the drinking or the fast life that got to him. It was a broken heart. For the people who knew him best, the legendary Dean Martin didn't die on Christmas Day in 1995. He died on a cold, snowy day in March of 1987, right alongside the son he adored. The man who lived for those last 8 years was just a ghost, haunted by a memory, silently watched over by the woman who had been his queen, his anchor, and, in the end, the sole witness to his long, tragic goodbye. Their fairy tale romance dissolved into a shared story of survival, a story that proves that sometimes, the deepest love isn't found in a glamorous beginning, but in the quiet, heartbreaking loyalty that lasts long after the happy ending has faded away.